Hi guys, Olive here today to talk to you about the books I'll be looking to take on in October 2020. October is spooky season. Around this time of year, my reading always tends to get darker and even slightly sinister. My TBR for the month of October definitely reflects that. Even my selections off of my lists lean in that direction. So my classic pick for the month is going to be Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, and not just Frankenstein, but the 1818 edition of Frankenstein. I spoke about this a little bit in my latest haul, but Mary Shelley wrote this book when she was very young. I think she was in her early 20s. And then when she was an older woman, she came back to this book she had written as a younger woman and heavily revised it. She went back and changed a lot about it. I've not read either edition the whole way through, but I thought it would be a good idea for me to read the original first, since it is the original. At some vague, distant point in the future, I probably will read the revised edition, if only to just compare them. But regardless, this is the very famous story of a scientist bringing a monster to life. I am so excited to sit down and just inhale this book. I'm hoping to do it all in one sitting, which it's fairly short, so I think I can achieve that. But I want it to be the perfect atmosphere. I want to read this on a dark and rainy night, or even better, a dark and stormy night. We get a lot of those here in Pittsburgh during the month of October, so I think I can make it happen. And then my pick off of my 5-star nonfiction prediction list for the month of October is going to be Dark Banquet by Bill Shutt. This is a nonfiction book, obviously, all about the fascinating lives of blood-sucking creatures. So vampire bats, leeches, that kind of thing. You can probably tell why I thought this would make a good choice for the month of October. I'm just generally really excited about this book though, because I've read this author's most recent book. I read it a few years ago when it came out. It is a history of the practice of cannibalism, both in the natural world and in the human world. Despite its very dark subject matter, he made that book on cannibalism such an enjoyable reading experience. It's one of several different reasons why I felt compelled to review that book here on my channel while I was drunk on red wine. My enjoyment of that book on cannibalism was the main predictor that this book might end up earning 5 stars for me, but even if it doesn't, I am sure that it will make for a terrific seasonal read. Then the rest of my October TBR is going to be dominated by new releases. I do have a couple that I'm going to be reading this month that came out earlier this year, but most of these are due to come out in the month of October. I have a couple that I'm looking to take on that aren't quite as seasonal as the rest of them, so I'll talk about those two first. First, there's Pale Morning Light with Violet Swan by Deborah Reed. I initially heard about this one from Margaret Renkl. She's the author of Late Migrations. She's also a columnist for the New York Times. She was talking about this one on social media, and she said she thought it was beautiful. Now, last summer, I was lucky enough to meet Margaret Renkl at an author event. It was a very small event, so she and I got a lot of one-on-one time to talk. While we were talking, we were sharing a lot of recommendations and raving about a lot of the same books, so I know we share very similar tastes. So when she was raving about this one, I immediately requested it on NetGalley. This book is about a fictional abstract painter who's lived a very private life despite being so famous for her work. We meet her when she's in her early 90s. She's very aware that she's dying, and she decides she finally wants to tell her life story using a documentary and one final painting. Not only does this book have the Margaret Renkl seal of approval, which is good enough to get me to read it, but it also seemed very 13th Tale, Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, where an older woman wants to finally tell her life story before she dies. I loved both of those books, so I am very into that premise. But then the main character of this book, the title character of this book, is an artist. And while I will never claim that I understand art, I probably never will, I really enjoy reading about art and artists. It's just something I like reading about, so I'm so hesitant to say I think I'm going to love this book, because every single time I've done that lately, it has come back to bite me. I really don't want to jinx myself, so I'll just say that I'm looking forward to reading it. But another new release I requested on NetGalley because of a positive association is Group by Christy Tate. This is a memoir of a woman who spent a number of years in group therapy. She started going to group therapy because she was having very dark thoughts. She was still dealing with the aftermath of an eating disorder, all while being in law school. As the subtitle of this book says, she gives credit to this experience of going to group therapy for saving her life. I am super curious to hear why it was so meaningful for her and also just what the experience of going to group therapy is like. I quite honestly find it fairly terrifying. The positive association I had with this book, the initial motivating factor for me to request it off of NetGalley, is the fact that this book reminded me ever so slightly of Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb. That is another memoir about therapy, and it was actually my favorite nonfiction book of last year. So if I like this memoir even half as much as I liked that one, I will be a very happy camper. But now on to the more seasonal new releases. And by seasonal, I mean that this time of year, I really like to read books about magic, books dealing with death or medicine, true crime, campus novels, that kind of thing. First, I just couldn't resist Where Dreams Descend by Janella Angelis. This is a YA book that seems to be very popular right now. It seems like a lot of people are talking about this one. It is a book all about competing magical acts at a circus. Sounds a lot like the Night Circus, which is precisely why I couldn't resist this one. Partially because a lot of people have been talking about this one lately. I have seen some mixed reviews, so I'm going to remain cautiously optimistic. I don't want to get my hopes up and be disappointed like I have been with so many fiction books lately. I also just recently saw that this is going to be the start of a series. I'm not quite sure how long the series is planned to be. Maybe it's just a trilogy, but regardless, if this book ends on a really annoying cliffhanger that's trying to exploit its audience, I'm going to be very upset. I'm also planning on reading Dark Archives by Megan Rosenblum. This is a new nonfiction book that looks at the now unsavory practice of binding books with human skin. The author of this book is a librarian, and she did a lot of research for this book in order to be able to separate myth from reality when it comes to the creation of these tomes. She also discusses the ethics of libraries providing housing for these volumes now. They didn't just disappear just because we don't bind books this way anymore. I imagine that I'm going to have a physical reaction to this one, but it was way too interesting to pass up. I have to read this now. Maybe I'll read it right after I read Frankenstein. The next new release I'm looking to take on this month is more overtly medical. It's called The Organ Thieves by Chip Jones. This is a true story that happened in 1968 when a Black man walked into a Virginia research hospital with a head injury and ended up having his own heart removed from his chest and transplanted into a white man. Like all stories, this didn't happen in a vacuum, so it seems like he's not going to just discuss this incident, but also talk about it in relation to how Black Americans have historically been treated within the healthcare system, and also how this incident factored into the ongoing race to achieve the first heart transplant that was going on between hospitals at the time. I do enjoy reading true crime this time of year, but I think this one will be really important in understanding the legacy of a lot of issues that we still see today. Another medical nonfiction book that I'll be looking to take on in October is called Bones, Inside and Out by Roy A. Meals. This is a book, of course, all about bones, and it was very appropriately written by an orthopedic surgeon. I read a different yet similar book earlier this year called Skeleton Keys by Riley Black, and while it was a good book, it was far more about archaeology and the preservation of bones than it was about the science of bones, and that's kind of what I was looking for from it. Because this author is an orthopedic surgeon, I think I'm going to get all that good science about bones, what they're made up of, how they grow, how they break, how they heal, all that good science. I can't wait to read this. The last two books on this TBR are going to be fiction. Both are still upcoming releases, but they're both fiction. I have not sunk my teeth into a good campus novel yet this season, and that strikes me as a problem. So I am hyped that I'm going to be picking up They Never Learn by Lane Fargo. This book is all about a murderous English professor who inserts herself into the ongoing investigation into the crimes that she has previously committed, all while she's plotting her next kill. This seems like such an interesting mix of a thriller, since we're inside the mind of a murderer, but then also a campus novel. I have heard amazing things about this one thus far, and I cannot wait to read it. And then finally, I am most certainly going to be reading The Searcher by Tana French. If you don't know Tana French, she's the author of the Dublin Murder Squad series. I am a huge fan of hers. This book is not a part of the Dublin Murder Squad series, but it does still follow a detective, albeit a retired one. He moved to rural Ireland after he retired. He bought this fixer-upper of a cottage to focus his energy on and to remove himself from the city, from solving crimes. But he still starts to feel the pull back into investigation when a local boy asks for help in locating his missing brother. This is not Tana French's first foray into standalones. She did release one at the end of 2018. It was called The Witch Elm. I reviewed it here on my channel. I didn't think it was her strongest book. It was her first book where she wasn't focusing on a detective. It seems like in this book she might be going for a combination of her old and new styles, where it's about a detective but it's not a part of a series. I'm hoping that makes for a winning combination. So those are all the books that I'm going to be prioritizing in the month of October, but if I have time left at the end of the month, I am still going to try to squeeze in some catch-up reading, some books that I didn't finish on previous month's TBRs. I would really like to get those finished as the end of the year approaches, as impossible as that is to believe. I would also really like to read a book or two for Victober if I have time. October always ends up being such a hectic month for me as I make plans for Nonfiction November. More info on that coming soon. October always ends up paying the price. I always end up reading less than a normal month. So I didn't want to make any grand plans. I'm just hoping to get to all these books, and if I have time for more, then that's awesome. As always, if you've read any of these books, if you've heard about any of them, or if you would like to read them after seeing them in this video, I'd love to hear from you in the comment section below. Any general comments or questions you may have can go there as well, or you can find me on a variety of different places on social media, and the links to all of my profiles will be in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.